If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
You are listening to Mindshock. This is Bruce McGuire, and this is the Hollow Earth series. Part 1, The Ancient Origins of Hollow Earth. One of the most mysterious and long-standing myths and legends is that of the Hollow Earth. Now, there are several different models of Hollow Earth. The main Hollow Earth theory states that the Earth is a hollow planet with ancient entrances to the subterranean world scattered throughout it, including near both the North Pole and the South Pole. This theory has been present since the dawn of man throughout ancient times, and scientists, even in modern eras, such as the famous Edmund Halley of Halley's Comet fame, have defended it, as well as many others, including mathematicians and physicists. But where did this Hollow Earth theory come from? It's a fascinating subject, and it actually touches upon so many other things, which we'll be getting into throughout the whole series. But today, we will look at ancient cultures and ancient civilizations who all happened to have very similar stories of Hollow Earth. Now, whether you believe these stories or not, whether they're true or not, regardless of who believes what, it's definitely interesting, and it cannot be completely written off as mere coincidence that all of these civilizations all over the world just happen to have the same stories. Hollow Earth is almost as widespread as the Great Flood myth. And if you've heard the other podcast on myths and legends, the Mindshock episode, Ancient Myths and Urban Legends, to see how these myths and legends persist and the root truth that is most likely present in all of them. So technically, at least to a certain degree, Hollow Earth has already been proven. There are underground cities, caverns, lakes, tunnels all over the world. There are actually hundreds of miles of ancient tunnel and cave systems underneath Ecuador and Peru. These were discovered by Juan Moritz, an Argentinian ethnologist. And underground cities like Derinkayu in Turkey are extensive and well known. These are not myths and legends. These are cities and tunnel systems that have already been discovered. Some of them are very ancient. So evidence of a Hollow Earth is found in history of almost all ancient civilizations. I mean, if we could go back to 3rd millennium BC, ancient Babylon, in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is the semi-mythic king of Uruk in Mesopotamia, best known from the Epic of Gilgamesh. This was written circa 2150 to 1400 BC, and this is the Sumerian Babylonian poem, and it predates Homer, Greek Homer, by 1500 years approximately. So this is the oldest epic currently known in world literature. So the hero, Gilgamesh, visited his ancestor, Utnapishtim, in the bowels of the earth. Gilgamesh's journey took him to the twin-peaked mountain called Mashu, where the sun sets into one side of the mountain at night and rises out of the other side in the morning. Utnapishtim lives beyond the mountain, but the two scorpion monsters that guard its entrance refuse to allow Gilgamesh to enter the tunnel that passed through it. Gilgamesh pleaded with them, and they relented. After a harrowing passage through total darkness, Gilgamesh emerged into a beautiful garden by the sea. There he met Siduri, a veiled tavern keeper, and tells her about his quest. She warns him that seeking immortality is futile and that he should be satisfied with the pleasures of this world. However, when she can't turn him away from his purpose, she directs him to Urshanabi, the ferryman. Urshanabi takes Gilgamesh on the boat journey across the sea and through the waters of death to Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim in this Babylonian epic is the survivor of a mythological flood, the Great Flood, the deluge. Why does this keep coming up all the time? Maybe there was really a great flood, and that's why all these ancient civilizations keep mentioning it. Out of all the catastrophes, I mean, it could have been a great earthquake, but it wasn't. It was a flood. It could have been some kind of comet that the extinction of the dinosaurs, if you believe in that all these mass extinction events, it could have been some kind of virus. It could have been some kind of monster. I mean, if we're talking myths and legends, and monsters might be real, or dragons might be. I mean, dragons are mentioned all the time as well, but not as destroying the earth. Why is it a great flood? Maybe there's something to it. Anyway, Utnapishtim is the survivor of this great flood. And Gilgamesh wants to know the secret of Utnapishtim's immortality. Utnapishtim is supposedly the only man to escape death. And here's another interesting thing about Utnapishtim. Parallels to Noah. Utnapishtim actually preserved human and animal life in a great boat that he built. And he and his wife were deified by the god Enlil. So, again, here we go in this epic. We have a halfway point between the living and the dead. A realm not quite physical, not completely spiritual. And of course, this is the oldest mention of the ferryman, who in Greek mythology is, of course, Charon, or Charon, the ferryman of Hades, who carries souls of the deceased across the rivers Styx and Acheron that divide the world of the living from the world of the dead. So how much of this is literal, how much of this is a myth, we don't know. Hard to say. How much of this is referencing Hollow Earth? We will get to more. In Oceanic Mythology, the great Roland B. Dixon published 1916. And this is a great work of myths and legends in the early 1900s, and there's a great series, but this is on Oceanic Mythology. Quote, from a consideration of the cosmogonic myths of Australia here outlined, it would appear that a number of conclusions are justified. It has already been pointed out that a broad distinction may be drawn on linguistic grounds between the northern and central tribes on the one hand, and those of the remainder of Australia on the other. Unfortunately, we have no myth material from Western Australia, so that nothing can be said of its relations to the remainder of the continent. It is fairly clear, however, that the linguistic divergencies between the northern and central portions, as contrasted with the southern and eastern districts, are paralleled by differences in mythology. In the former region, we find scarcely a trace of any myths of the source of the world or of a creator deity. The origin of mankind is either a coming up out of the ground or a spontaneous beginning as embryonic or amorphous beings who are made human by one or another group of totem ancestors. The sun and the moon are regarded as persons who, like other early mythical beings, emerged from the ground and later ascended to the sky. And knowledge of fire is said to have been taught to the ancestors in the underworld. So this is very, very interesting, and a lot of these ancient civilizations have myths and legends about the Native Americans, some of these other ancient civilizations, that life or the original gods came up from the ground. That's very interesting, because in other stories, they are sky people that came from the sky, and then there's also a combination of both. They went from the ground to the sky and back, or from the sky to the ground, and then up to the earth realm. So, very, very curious. A lot of curiosities. And mainstream science actually speculates that Aboriginal Australians might be the oldest genetically isolated culture on Earth, so somewhere between 60 and 80,000 years old, depending on your opinion of all these dating processes and how accurate they are. But Aboriginal Australians are some of the oldest human cultures on Earth. and these are their stories. And very interesting that parts of Australia, none of their ancient myths and legends have survived. Now, of course, we have the ancient Greeks, some of the most popular myths and legends. So the underworld myth is usually referencing the ancient Greeks because it's one of the most popular. So we have Tartarus, which is separate from the underworld, and then we also have the Elysium Fields, which not too much is usually explained about these Elysium Fields, but they're very, very curious, particularly in Hollow Earth theories. So from the oral tradition, where these began before recorded history, so these were passed on and then recorded finally by the poet Hesiod in his Theogony, and then of course Homer's Iliad written somewhere between 700 and 850 BC. Perhaps the most familiar story about the underworld is that of Hades taking an unwilling young goddess Persephone below the earth to live with him as his queen. While Persephone was allowed back to the land of the living because she had eaten pomegranate seeds while with Hades, she had to return to Hades every year. And then that's obviously not the only story about the underworld. We have Theseus being trapped on a throne in the underworld, and then various other heroic journeys to rescue people from the underworld. So what is Tartarus and how is it different from the underworld? So Hesiod asserts that a bronze anvil falling from heaven would fall 9 days before it reached the earth. The anvil would then take 9 more days to fall from earth to Tartarus. In the Iliad, Zeus asserts that Tartarus is as far beneath Hades as heaven is above earth. So we're looking at some kind of a layered realm system, whether we're talking all these realms are physical, so then it's a layered physical realm, and in some of the ancient Vedic scriptures that they have this kind of multi-layered realm system where the earth is more of a realm. And if you're a fan of Nikola Tesla, he actually said the earth is not a planet, it's a realm. So there's various interpretations, and to get to the truth, we got to kind of go through all of them and consider all these different possibilities. So if we're taking it literally, then we have heaven, earth, Tartarus. And then also Tartarus being as far beneath Hades as heaven is above earth. And then if you believe in massive misinterpretation, I mean, if we're going really, really out there with some of the theories, some people actually think that the earth realm is Hades, and this is the realm of the dead in our fallen world. But that was just a brief aside of mind-shocking theories. We will not really be getting into that in this podcast. So, according to Greek mythology, obviously the realm of Hades is the place of the dead. Tartarus is a separate place. So when Kronos came to power as the king of the Titans, he imprisoned the one-eyed Cyclops and the 100-armed Hecatonacaries in Tartarus and set the monster Kempi as its guard. Zeus killed Kempi and released these imprisoned giants to aid in his conflict with the Titans. The gods of Olympus eventually triumphed. Kronos and many of the other Titans were banished to Tartarus through Prometheus, Epimetheus, Metis, and most of the female Titans were spared. According to Pindar, Kronos somehow later earned Zeus's forgiveness and was released from Tartarus to become the ruler of Elysium, which we'll get to in a moment. Another Titan, Atlas, was sentenced to hold the sky on his shoulders to prevent it from resuming its primordial embrace with the earth. Other gods could be sentenced to Tartarus as well. Apollo is a prime example, although Zeus later freed him. The Hecatonacaries became guards of Tartarus's prisoners. Later, when Zeus overcame the monster Typhon, he threw him into wide Tartarus. So, very, very interesting here. Tartarus seems to be some kind of a prison underworld, not necessarily for the dead, but for gods or titans that could come and go depending on their favor with Zeus after the victory over the Titans. According to Plato, Rhadamanthus Acis and Minos were the judges of the dead and chose who went to Tartarus. Rhadamanthus judged Asian souls, Acis judged European souls, and Minos was the deciding vote and judge of the Greek. Very, very interesting that the ancient Greeks already knew about these other cultures, so once again pointing to some kind of worldwide travel in the ancient world. Plato also mentioned that sinners were cast under the ground to be punished in accordance with their sins. This is from the myth of Er. So, there were multiple entrances to Tartarus. One was in Aornum. Aornum was an oracle in ancient Greece located in Thesprotia, in a cave called Charonium. And of course, this is also known as Charon's Cave. And this cave was said to give poisonous vapors from it. So this was supposedly also the entrance for Hades, the Greek underworld. In one version, Orpheus travels to Aornum to recover his wife Eurydice, or Eurydice, from Hades. So very, very interesting. Now, some of the most fascinating Greek mythology referencing the underworld, or the land of the dead, is the concept of the Elysium Fields, or Elysium. So Hesiod lived at the same time as Homer, so we're looking at the 8th or 7th century BC. So in his Work and Days, he wrote that Father Zeus, the son of Cronos, gave a living and an abode apart from men and made them dwell at the ends of the earth. Is he talking about the poles here? Is he talking about the Arctic, the Antarctic? And they live untouched by sorrow in the islands of the blessed along the shore of deep swirling Oceanus, or Okeanos. Happy heroes for whom the grain-giving earth bears honey-sweet fruit flourishing thrice a year. Far from the deathless gods, and Cronus rules over them, for the father of men and gods released him from his bonds. And these last equally have honor and glory. So these are the people of the dead, or the dead that deserve to live this way. Another interesting point, and I'll be doing another podcast series on the ages of man, but supposedly before the victory of the gods of Olympus and Zeus, where these gods were basically cruel and unkind, and mankind suffered under these gods, under the Titans was a golden age of man. Some people think that that's in reference to Atlantis or some kind of global civilization or global empire where humans lived in happier times, where there was world peace or greater understanding, greater technology, or in the ages of man, the golden age of man. So anyway, this is what is written by Hesiod about Elysium. So according to Homer, in his epic poems, 8th century, the Elysian fields, or Elysium, refer to a beautiful meadow in the underworld. So it's a section of the underworld where the favored of Zeus enjoy perfect happiness. This was the ultimate paradise a hero could achieve. Basically an ancient Greek heaven. In the Odyssey, Homer tells us that in Elysium, men lead an easier life than anywhere else in the world. For in Elysium there falls not rain, nor hail, nor snow, but Oceanus, the giant body of water surrounding the entire world, breathes ever with a west wind that sings softly from the sea and gives fresh life to all men. It's kind of interesting that these references to Elysium, or even Tartarus at the ends of the world, or part of the underworld, and then yet still reference men lead an easier life than anywhere else in the world. So is this all part of one world? Is it not really under the earth? Is it just way to the outside? Is that the poles? Is there some kind of weird barrier to get through them? We don't know. So Virgil, of course, the famous Virgil, born 70 BC, a Roman master poet, he described the Elysian fields as more than just a pretty meadow. So they were part of the underworld as the home of the dead who were judged worthy of divine favor. And in the Aeneid, these blessed dead compose poetry, sing, dance, and tend to their chariots. In the epic Aeneid, Sibyl, a prophetess, tells Aeneas, the Trojan hero, about the underworld. There to the right, as it runs under the walls of great Dis, a god of the underworld, is our way to Elysium. Aeneas talks to his father, Anchises, in the Elysian fields in Book 6 of the Aeneid. Anchises, who is enjoying the good retired life of Elysium, says, "Then we are sent to spacious Elysium, a few of us to possess the blissful fields." And Virgil was not the only poet in later times. A Roman poet, Statius, in Thebaid, says that the pious who earn the favor of the gods get to Elysium. Seneca states that only in death that the tragic Trojan king Priam achieved peace. For now in the peaceful shades of Elysium's grove he wanders, and happy midst pious souls he seeks for his murdered son Hector. So there's ongoing references to the Elysian fields, or Elysium, and of course either part of the underworld or part of the world. Is the underworld part of the world? We don't know. But the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans had much to say about these underworld realms. So let's move on to ancient Egypt. So it's known as Duat, Doat, also known as Tuat, Tuaut, Akert, Amentes, Amenti, or Niter Kertet in Coptic. So this is the realm of the dead in ancient Egyptian mythologies. So the god Osiris is the lord of the underworld, and he personified rebirth and life after death. And he is the first mummy depicted in the Osiris myth. So the underworld is also home to various gods, and the Duat, the underworld region, is through which the sun god Ra traveled from west to east each night, and it is where he battled Apophis, who embodied primordial chaos which the sun had to defeat in order to rise each morning and bring order back to the earth. And it is also where people's souls went after death for judgment. Are you guys seeing this myth or pattern? Souls will be judged. Another theme that runs through all of these ancient civilizations' mythologies. Pretty interesting. Although this place is not all the afterlife was, burial chambers were touching points between the mundane world and the Duat, and the effectiveness of the dead could use tombs to travel back and forth from the Duat. So once again, just like the Greeks and some other civilizations, the underworld is not a finite place. You can travel back and forth between the world and the underworld. Does that mean that it's a physical place, that it's in hollow earth? You can go back and forth. Or, again, are we just going into the metaphysical realms? In which case you could still go back and forth, but not so simple physics. So each night through the Duat, the sun god Ra traveled, signifying revivification as the main goal of the dead. Ra traveled under the world upon his Atet barge from west to east and was transformed from its aged atom form into Khepri, the new dawning sun. The dead king worshipped as a god was also central to the mythology surrounding the concept of Duat. often depicted as being one with Ra. Along with the sun god, the dead king had to travel through the kingdom of Osiris, the Duat, using the special knowledge he was supposed to possess, which was recorded in the coffin texts that served as a guide to the hereafter, not just for the king, but for all deceased. According to the Duat, the underworld consisted of 12 regions, signifying the 12 hours of the sun god's journey through it, battling Apep in order to bring order back to the earth in the morning. As his rays illuminated the Duat throughout the journey, they revived the dead who occupied the underworld and let them enjoy life after death in that hour of the night when they were in the presence of the sun god, after which they went back to their sleep, waiting for the god's return the following night. That's a little bit unique, so we don't really see that in other mythologies. This seems pretty unique to the Egyptian. Just like the dead king, the rest of the dead journeyed through the various parts of the Duat, not to be unified with the sun god, but to be judged. If the deceased was successfully able to pass various demons and challenges, then he or she would reach the weighing of the heart. In this ritual, the heart of the deceased was weighed by Anubis against the father of Ma'at, which represented truth and justice. Any heart that is heavier than the feather was rejected and eaten by Amit, the devourer of souls, as these people were denied existence after death in the Duat. The souls that were lighter than the feather would pass this most important test and would be allowed to travel towards Aru, the field of rushes, an ideal version of the world they knew, in which they would plow, sow, and harvest abundant crops. So very interesting again. So the Elysium fields, this heaven-like meadows, and now we have the field of rushes in the Duat of the Egyptian underworld. So again, we're seeing reoccurring concepts here. What is known of the Duat derives principally from funeral texts such as the Book of Gates, the Book of Caverns, the Coffin texts, the Duat, and the Book of the Dead. Each of these documents fulfilled a different purpose and give a different conception of the Duat, and different texts could be inconsistent with one another. Surviving texts differ in age and origin, and there likely was never a single uniform conception of the Duat, as is the case of many theological concepts in ancient Egypt. So, like a lot of things in ancient Egypt, there were different cultures throughout all these dynasties. So, obviously, there would be variations. So, regarding the geography of Duat, it is similar in outline to the world the Egyptians knew. There are realistic features like rivers, islands, fields, lakes, mounds, and caverns. However, there were also fantastic lakes of fire, walls of iron, and trees of turquoise. In the Book of Two Ways, one of the coffin texts, there is even a map-like image of the Duat. The Book of the Dead and the coffin texts were intended to guide people who had recently died through the Duat's dangerous landscape and to live as a human. Emphasized in some of these texts are mounds and caverns inhabited by gods, demons, or supernatural animals, which threatened the deceased along their journey. The purpose of the books is not to lay out a geography, but to describe a succession of rites of passage with the dead, which the dead would have to pass to reach eternal life. In spite of the many demon-like inhabitants of the Duat, it is not equivalent to the Abrahamic conceptions of hell, in which souls are condemned with fiery torment. The absolute punishment for the wicked in ancient Egyptian thought was the denial of an afterlife to the deceased, ceasing to exist in form. The grotesque spirits of the underworld were not evil, but under the control of the gods, being present as various ordeals that the deceased had to face. The Duat was also a residence for various gods, including Osiris, Anubis, Thoth, Horus, Hathor, and Mat, who all appeared to the dead soul as it makes its way toward judgment. So, again, regarding the geography, so it has similar things as the terrain of the earth, but also lakes of fire. So in most descriptions, going beneath the surface of the earth, you would have tremendous heat, gases, and all of these things, particularly those found in science fiction novels like Journey to the Center of the Earth and such. So very, very interesting. So did they just make all this stuff up? Like, where did they get this info? It's just very, very curious that they would just randomly make that up. Also, we have, from Egypt, the mysterious Halls of Amenti. So these are actually quite talked about in New Age and occult works, particularly the Tablets of Thoth, the Emerald Tablets, the famed Emerald Tablets. And this podcast isn't about the tablets, but I will read a quick excerpt from the tablets. Deep in Earth's heart lie the halls of Amenti. Far neath the islands of sunken Atlantis, halls of the dead and halls of the living, bathed in the fire of the infinite all. Very interesting. Make that what you will of it. One of the theories actually is that Atlantis is in Hollow Earth. Believe that or not, again, Hollow Earth touches all of these ancient concepts, myths, and legends. That's why it's so fascinating. Other people view the Halls of Amenti as a non-physical place, as a spiritual realm. Some people say it's the same thing as the Hall of Records, or the Akashic Records, or the collective unconsciousness, or the collective memory, or the Wheel of Karma, where souls experience physical form. So some believe it's completely physical, and it's underneath the Sphinx and the Giza Plateau. There's a huge tunnel system underneath the Giza Plateau and the pyramids in Egypt. And, that's a topic for another podcast, because they were discovered multiple times, and now all excavation has been officially halted, and you're not allowed to dig in Giza. So very, very interesting. Are they covering something up? What's going on? And some people, of course, just subscribe to the metaphysical explanations of the Halls of Amenti. Others believe you can just meditate and access the Halls of Amenti at any time. It's a spiritual destination. It is a path to ascension. But moving on from Egypt, let's look at Buddhism and ancient Tibetans. We have one of the most famous lost civilizations, or lost lands, mythical lands, that of Agartha. So, in Hinduism, Agartha means underworld. So, according to British explorer T. Wilkins, the Mongolian tribes believed that there are entrances to a great tunnel system that leads to a subterranean world of antediluvian descent, somewhere in a recess of Afghanistan. Some people say it's somewhere in the Hindu Kush. Eric Norman writes, there is an ancient legend among the Hindus of India that tells of a civilization of immense beauty beneath Central Asia. Several underground cities are said to be located north of the Himalayan mountains, possibly in Afghanistan or under the Hindu Kush. This subterranean Shangri-La is inhabited by a race of golden people who seldom communicate with the surface world. From time to time, they travel into our land through tunnels and stretch in many directions. Entrances to the tunnels are believed to be hidden in several of the ancient cities of the Orient. Tunnel entrances are said to be in Ellora and the Ajanta Caverns in the Chandor mountain range of India. From the Brinsley-Lepore Trench Book. Among the Mongolian tribes of Inner Mongolia, even today there are traditions about tunnels and subterranean worlds which sound as fantastic as anything in modern novels. One legend, if it be that, says that the tunnels lead to a subterranean world of antediluvian descent somewhere in a recess of Afghanistan or in the region of the Hindu Kush. It is even given the name Agarthi. The legend adds that a labyrinth of tunnels and underground passages is extended in a series of links connecting Agarthi with all other underground worlds. The subterranean world, it is said, is lit by a strange green luminescence, which favors the growth of crops and conduces to length of days and health. Some similarities, once again, to the Egyptian and Greek versions of the underworld. This last account is of special interest because Cosimo refers to this green fluorescence in another part of the world. He writes in Timeless Earth about a strange bottomless pit in Azerbaijan in the Soviet Union. Apparently a bluish light comes from its wall and odd noises are heard. Eventually, after investigating and exploring, scientists found a whole system of tunnels connecting with other systems of tunnels in Georgia and all over the Caucasus. So Agartha, also known as Agartha, Agarthi, or Agartha, is a legendary city that is said to reside in the Earth's core. It is related to the Hollow Earth theory and is a popular subject in esotericism, as well as the occult. Agartha is one of the most common names cited for the society of underground dwellers. Shambhala, or Shangri-La, is also said to be its capital city. The mythical paradise of Shambhala is known under many different names. It has been called the Forbidden Land, the Land of White Waters, the Land of Radiant Spirits, the Land of Living Fire, the Land of Living Gods, and the Land of Wonders. Hindus have known it as Aryavartha, which is literally the land or realm of the Aryans, the land of the noble worthy ones, the land from which the Vedas come, the Chinese as Sitian, the western paradise of Siwangmu, the royal mother of the West, the Russian Old Believers, a 19th century Christian sect knew it as Belavodia, and the Kyrgyz people as Janedar, but throughout Asia it is best known by its Sanskrit name, Shambhala, meaning the place of peace, of tranquility. Very interesting. While once a popular concept, in the last century little serious attention has been paid to these conjectures, with the possible apocryphal exception of Adolf Hitler, and the theory is not supported by modern science. The idea of subterranean worlds may have been inspired by the ancient religious beliefs in Hades, Sheol, and Hell. Ferdinand Antoni Ossendowski's 1920s book, Beasts, Men, and Gods, also discussed Agartha. The myth of Agartha is also known as Shambhala, as it was known in India, the underworld realm peopled by initiates and led by the masters who are the spiritual leaders of humanity. And of course, in theosophy and other New Age and occult views, it is also the place of the ascended masters, the ascended ones, which you can channel and communicate with. And of course, in future episodes, we'll also be going over the Third Reich and its quest for Shambhala, Hollow Earth, Antarctica, and all of that madness. Documented madness, I might add. So, Agartha is the great Asian university of the initiates of the greater mysteries. Their Mahatma, the great soul, who is also known as the Lord of the World, plays the part of the supreme spiritual leader of humanity. According to Alexander St. Yves de Alvedir, who lived from 1842 to 1909 of France, the secret world of Agartha and all of its wisdom and wealth will be accessible for all mankind when Christianity lives up to the commandments which were once drafted by Moses and Jesus, meaning when the anarchy which exists in our world is replaced by synarchy. St. Yves gives a lively description of Agartha in this book as if it were a place which really exists, situated in the Himalayas in Tibet. St. Yves' version of the history of Agartha is based upon revealed information, meaning received by St. Yves himself through attunement. I think he's referencing channeling here, tuning. St. Yves de Alviedre created the archometer. Shambhala concept figures prominently in Vajrayana Buddhism and Tibetan Kalachakra teachings, and revived in the West by Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society. As with many other concepts in Vajrayana Buddhism, the idea of Shambhala is said to have an outer, inner, and secret meaning. The outer meaning understands Shambhala to exist as a physical place, although individuals only with the appropriate karma can reach it and experience it as such. There are various ideas about where this society is located, but is often placed in Central Asia, north of Tibet. The inner and secret meanings refer to more subtle understandings of what Shambhala represents and are generally passed on orally. Alice Bailey transformed it into a kind of extra-dimensional or spiritual reality. The Roerichs see its existence as both spiritual and physical. The hollow earth or hollow planet theory is also supported by superconscious knowledge based on channeled sources of universal nature like Seth. Channeled by Jane Roberts, Ramtha by J.Z. Knight, and Datre by Aona. So it is very, very interesting, this Shambhala and Agartha. So there's also similarities in some of the descriptions of Shambhala and Atlantis itself. So in Hinduism, Tibetan Buddhism, Shambhala is a mythical kingdom, and this kingdom is said to be laid out precisely in the same form as an 8-petaled lotus blossom, surrounded by a chain of snow mountains. At the center lies the palace of the king of Shambhala, who governed from the city called Kalapa. Shambhala is also referred to as Shangri-La in some texts. And then we have the descriptions of Kalapa. So according to Buddhist legend, it's the capital city of the kingdom of Shambhala, where the Kulika king is said to reign on a lion throne. It is said to be an exceedingly beautiful city with a sandalwood pleasure grove containing a huge 3-dimensional Kalachakra mandala made by King Sushandra. A mandala means circle in Sanskrit. It is a spiritual and ritual symbol in Hinduism and Buddhism representing the universe. It has become a generic term for any diagram, chart, or geometric pattern that represents the cosmos metaphysically or symbolically, a microcosm of the universe. Kalapa Court, the palace of the king, stands on a platform of pearl in the center. The building is 9 stories high. The roof and floor of the king's chamber consist of crystal plants that radiate heat for warmth. The city is shaped like a square and surrounded by walls made of ruby. There are 4 gates for entry made of precious stones. There are 31 pavilions, each of which is surrounded by gardens and streams, and there are 2 half-moon-shaped lakes on 2 sides of Kalapa. So very, very interesting. Shambhala is mentioned in various ancient texts, including the Kala Kakra Tantra and the ancient Zhang Zung texts of Western Tibet. The Bon scriptures speak of a closely related land known as Tagzi's Olmo Rung Ring, and this is a non-dual spiritual realm, plane, or dimension. It resides beyond dualism. It is understood to be a timeless, perfect realm where peace and joy are the very fabric of being. Its fabled location is to the west of Mount Kailash and shaped like an 8-petaled lotus, and divided into 4 regions: inner, middle, outer, and a boundary area. The sky of this realm is likened to an 8-spoked wheel, and the land itself is fragrant and colored by beautiful flora and landscaping, Chorten and snow-capped mountains. Hindu texts such as the Vishnu Purana mention the village Shambhala as the birthplace of Kalki, the final incarnation of Vishnu, who will usher in a new age. And Vishnu is, of course, one of the principal deities of Hinduism and the supreme being in the Vaishnavism tradition. Vishnu is the preserver in the Hindu Trinity, and that includes Brahma and Shiva. He is the past form of Krishna. And Shambhala eventually became known in Buddhism as a pure land, a fabulous kingdom whose reality is visionary or spiritual as much as physical and geographic. It was in this form that the Shambhala myth reached Western Europe and the Americas, where it influenced non-Buddhist as well as Buddhist spiritual seekers, and to some extent popular culture in general. So, in the Buddhist Kalachakra teachings, Shambhala is ruled over by Maitreya, the future Buddha. The Kalachakra Tantra prophesies that when the world declines into war and greed and all is lost, the 25th Kalki king will emerge from Shambhala with a huge army to vanquish dark forces and usher in a worldwide golden age. Using calculations from Kalachakra Tantra, Alex Berzin puts this date at 2424. Okay. So in the Altai Mountains folklore, Mount Beluga is believed to be a gateway to Shambhala. And the Altai mountain range is in Central and East Asia, where Russia, China, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan come together. And there were actually several expeditions to try to find Shambhala. So, the other interesting thing that in Tibet, there's also other myths and legends. There's a mystical shrine called Patala, which is said by the people there to sit atop an ancient cavern and tunnel system, which reaches throughout the entire Asian continent and possibly beyond. The Nagas also have an affinity with water, and the entrances to their underground palaces are often said to be hidden at the bottom of wells, deep lakes, and rivers. And in Hinduism, of course, the Naga is the mythological serpent race that took the form of cobras. They are described as the powerful, splendid, wonderful, and proud semi-divine race that can assume their physical form either as a human, partial human serpent, or the whole serpent. Their domain is the enchanted underworld, the underground realm filled with gems, gold, and other earthly treasures, called Nagaloka or Patala Loka. They are often associated with bodies of water, including rivers, lakes, seas, and wells, and are guardians of treasure. Their power and venom made them potentially dangerous to humans. However, they often took beneficial protagonist roles in Hindu mythology, such as in the Samudra Manthan mythology, Vasuki, a Nagaraja who abides on Shiva's neck, became the churning rope for churning the ocean of milk. Their eternal mortal enemies are the Garudas, the legendary semi-divine bird-like entities. Vishnu is originally portrayed in the form sheltered by Sesanaga or reclining on Sesa, but the iconography has been extended to other deities as well. Once again, we have serpents all over the place. Very, very interesting why some people link the serpent with DNA. Of course, the DNA spiral. So in Buddhism, it is believed that a race of superhuman and superwomen who occasionally come to the surface to oversee the development of the human race. It is also believed that the subterranean world has millions of inhabitants and many cities, of course the capital being Shambhala. Ancient philosophy states that Agartha was first colonized thousands of years ago when a holy man led a tribe to the underground. So here we have the originals being from Earth, from the surface Earth, and then they went underground. So these people have scientific knowledge and expertise far beyond that of the people who live on the surface of the planet. The Ramayana, one of the most famous texts of India, tells the story of the great avatar Rama. It described Rama as an emissary from Agartha, who arrived on a Vimana. Vimana, of course, flying saucer-like craft. In India, there is an ancient belief still held by some in a subterranean race of serpent people who dwell in the cities of Patala and Bhogavati. According to legend, they wage war on the kingdom of Agartha. The Nagas, according to the deep dwellers, are described as a very advanced race or species with a highly developed technology, and they also harbor a disdain for human beings, who they are said to abduct, torture, interbreed with, and even eat. The entrances to Bhogavati are somewhere in the Himalayas. Believers assert that Patala can be entered through the well of Sheshna in Benares, India. Says William Michael Mott in The Deep Dwellers, according to herpetologist and author Sherman A. Minton, as stated in his book Venomous Reptiles, this entrance is very real, with 40 steps which descend into a circular depression to terminate at a closed stone door, which is covered in bas-relief cobras. Wow, a lot of stuff in Hindu mythology and Buddhist teachings. Ancient Tibet is, of course, one of the most mystical lands, and we'll be getting into more of that later, especially, once again, Nazi Germany and the Third Reich's interest in Shambhala and Hollow Earth. Let's move on to the Native Americans. Hopi legends say that their ancestors once lived underground with a friendly race of ant people. But some of their kind turned to sorcery and made an alliance with lizard or serpent men known as the Two Hearts, which dwelt in still deeper caverns below. Once again, we have a layer system. Once again, we have serpent people. The flood of evil and violence forced the peaceful Hopis to the surface world. So in their legends, basically these evil entities are dwelling in the subterranean realm, not the peaceful, advanced cultures. The Navajo religious system is intricate. Like most Amerindian nations, they claim to have come from a subterranean world through caves or vents that connect with this upper world. Theirs is a mystery religion based on drug cults, peyotism, on shamanism, and on amuletic songs, dances, designs, and rituals. But the idea of a subterranean creation, one in which mankind somehow originated underground and later ascended to the earth in some manner, is peculiar not only to the Navajos, but to most Indian nations of the three Americas. This concept that a subterranean paradise whence mankind sprung into the present era coming from a former one was also widespread in the American world. Civilizing heroes such as Osiris, Serapis, and Mithras, and several others originally rose from a cave or subterranean abode, more or less in the way that Christ too rose from among the dead. This cave or tomb is the primordial cave, the cave of archetypes of which Plato tells us in his dialogues. It is the Pakari Tambu of the Incas, the cave of illusion so masterfully described in the Ramayana. In fact, this cave is no other than the sunken, submarine realm of Atlantis Eden. We have some people theorizing that Atlantis itself is the Garden of Eden and also a subterranean realm, also described as a cave system. The Polynesians also claim to have come originally from a sunken island or continent, which they called Hawaii or Yavaiki, which means something like sunken grove. Meadows, groves, we have recurring themes here. So, sunken Garden of Eden. And as we argue elsewhere, the Polynesian paradise, just as all others, indeed lay in the submerged portion of primordial Indonesia. Very, very interesting stuff here. Moving on to other American tribes, the Chippewa. In the beginning, before there were people, before there were animals, a lone woman lived in a cave. She lived on the roots and berries of the plants. One night, a magical dog crept into her cave and stretched out on the bed beside her. As the night grew long, the dog began to change. His body became smooth and almost hairless. His limbs grew long and straight. His features changed into those of a handsome warrior. 9 months later, the woman birthed a child. He was the first Chippewa male, and through him came the Chippewa peoples. So this legend places a lone woman living in a cave. In the Choctaw tradition, at the beginning there was a great mound. It was called Naniwea. It was from this mound that the Creator fashioned the first of the people. These people crawled through a long dark cave into daylight. They became the first. In the Tiwa Pueblo, in the beginning, the people lived in the darkness of the underground. One day, the mole came to visit them. The people asked him if there was another world beside the one they lived in. The mole told them to follow him. The people formed a line behind the mole as he began to dig his way upward. The people took the soil he loosened and passed it back to the end of the line. That is why the tunnel that was dug was closed behind them and they could never find their way back. He led them to a land with sunlight and blue skies. That is the end of the story. So we have all these American tribes having also similar stories of mankind emerging from caves or the underground realms. Physical, metaphysical, we do not know. In ancient China, we have Chinese folklore also referencing Hollow Earth. We have a time-lapse of hundreds of years. There is a book entitled The Report Concerning the Cave Heavens and Lands of Happiness in Famous Mountains by Tu Quangting, who lived from 850 to 933 AD. This book lists 10 cave heavens and 36 small cave heavens that were supposed to exist beneath the mountains in China. Here are the reported experiences of a man who entered a passageway leading to one of these cave heavens. After walking 10 miles, he suddenly found himself in a beautiful land with a clear blue sky, shining pinkish clouds, fragrant flowers, densely growing willows, towers the color of cinnabar, pavilions of red jade, and far-flung palaces. He was met by a group of lovely, seductive women who brought him to a house of jasper and played him beautiful music while he drank a ruby-red drink and a jade-colored juice. Just as he felt the urge to let himself be seduced, he remembered his family and returned to the passageway. Led by a strange light that danced before him, he walked back through the cave to the outer world. But when he reached his home village, he did not recognize anyone he saw, and when he arrived at his house, he met his own descendants of 9 generations hence. They told him that one of their ancestors had disappeared into a cavern 300 years before and had never been seen again. Very, very interesting. The Japanese also have a lot of mythology and folklore regarding caves and cave systems as well. So, the Chinese have their version of the underworld as well, known as Diyu. Diyu is the realm of the dead, or hell, in Chinese mythology. The literal meaning is earth prison. Now that opens up a whole bunch of can of worms. Earth prison means the prison on earth. Once again, going back to the idea that I'm not going to call them crazy because we don't know the true nature of the universe or earth with certainty. We can only speculate, theorize, and study all of this information. But if the earth is the underworld, then it would make sense that the earth itself would be earth prison, and then it would be the realm of the dead. But let's put that idea aside for now. So the Chinese underworld Diyu is based on a combination of the Buddhist concept of Naraka and traditional Chinese beliefs about the afterlife, and a variety of different expansions and reinterpretations of these two traditions. So the Naraka, in Sanskrit Niraya, is a term in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. It's usually referenced as hell in English, the hell realm, or purgatory. We're not going to go into all these major differences, but purgatory is more of a waiting state before a soul's fate is determined. But anyway, the Narakas of Buddhism closely relate to the Diyu, the hell in Chinese mythology. Naraka differs from the hell of Christianity in two respects. Firstly, beings are not sent to Naraka as the result of a divine judgment or punishment. And second, the length of a being's stay in Naraka is not eternal, but it is unusually long. So hundreds to millions to quintillions, 10 to the 18th power, of years. That's some interesting distinctions. So a being can be born into a Naraka as a direct result of karma or actions in their life, and that is where they stay for a finite period of time until karma has achieved its full result. Once the karma is used up, the rebirth happens in one of the higher worlds. Okay. The Buddha teaches about hell in the Devadatta Sutta, the 130th discourse of the Majjhima Nikaya, is a Buddhist scripture of these Buddhist scriptures. Physically, Narakas are a series of cavernous layers which extend below the ordinary human world into the earth. And there are different descriptions and different numbers and layers for each of these Narakas, and they hold different torments for souls. So there are 8 cold Narakas and 8 hot Narakas. So I will go through them in this very interesting Buddhist literature. So of the cold Narakas, we have our Buddha, The Blister Naraka, a dark frozen plain surrounded by icy mountains and continually swept by blizzards. Inhabitants of this world arise fully grown and abide lifelong naked and alone while the cold raises blisters upon their bodies. The length of life in this Naraka is said to be the time it would take to empty a barrel of sesame seeds if one only took out a single seed every 100 years. Life in this Naraka is 2 times 10 to the 12th power years long. Nirarbuda, the burst blister Naraka, is even colder than the Arbuda. There, the blisters burst open, leaving the beings' bodies covered with frozen blood and pus. Life in this Naraka is 4 by 10 to the 13th power years long. The Atata is the shivering Naraka. There, beings shiver in the cold, making an at sound with their mouths. Life in this Naraka is 8 by 10 to the 14th power years long. Hahava is the lamentation Naraka. There the beings lament in the cold, going ha, ha in pain. Life in this Naraka is 1.6 times 10 to the 16th power years long. Hahava, the chattering teeth Naraka, is where beings shiver as their teeth chatter, making the sound hu, hu. Life in this Naraka is 3.2 times 10 to the 17th power years long. Udpala is the blue lotus Naraka. The intense cold there makes the skin turn blue like the color of an Udpala water lily. Life in this Naraka is 6.4 times 10 to the 18th power years long. The Padma, the lotus Naraka, has blizzards that crack open frozen skin, leaving one raw and bloody. Life in this Naraka is 1.28 times 10 to the 20th power years long. The Mahapadma is the great lotus Naraka. The entire body cracks into pieces and the internal organs are exposed to the cold, also cracking. Life in this Naraka is 2.56 times 10 to the 21st power years long. Each lifetime in these Narakas is 20 times the length of the one before it, so these Buddhists sure have a good imagination, or whoever came up with this. The hot Narakas are Sanjiva, the reviving Naraka, has ground made of hot iron heated by an immense fire. Beings in this Naraka appear fully grown, already in a state of fear and misery. As soon as the beings begin to fear being harmed by others, their fellows appear and attack each other with iron claws, and hell guards appear and attack the being with fiery weapons. As soon as the being experiences an unconsciousness-like death, they are suddenly restored to full health and the attacks begin again. This seems like a video game. Other tortures experienced in this Naraka include having molten metal dropped upon them, being sliced into pieces, and suffering from the heat of the iron ground. Life in this Naraka is 1.62 times 10 to the 12th power years long. It is said to be 1,000 yojanas beneath Jambudvipa and 10,000 yojanas in each direction. A yojana being 7 miles or 11 kilometers. Interesting. Kala Sutra is the black thread Naraka. Includes the torments of Sanjiva. In addition, black lines are drawn upon the body, which hell guards use as guides to cut the beings with fiery saws and sharp axes. Life in this Naraka is 1.296 times 10 to the 13th power years long. The Samgata, the crushing Naraka, is surrounded by huge masses of rock that smash together and crush the beings to a bloody jelly. When the rocks move apart again, life is restored to the being and the process starts again. Life in this Naraka is 1.0368 times 10 to the 14th power years long. The Raurava, the screaming Naraka, is where beings run wildly about looking for refuge from the burning ground. When they find an apparent shelter, they are locked inside it as it blazes around them while they scream inside. Life in this Naraka is 8.2944 times 10 to the 14th power years long. The Maharaurava, the great screaming Naraka, is similar to Raurava. Punishment here is for people who maintain their own body by hurting others. In this hell, rural animals known as kravyada torment them and eat their flesh. Life in this Naraka is 6.63552 times 10 to the 15th power years long. Tapana is the heating Naraka, where hellguards impale beings on a fiery spear until flames issue from their noses and mouths. Life in this Naraka is 5.308416 times 10 to the 16th power years long. Pratapana, the great heating Naraka. The tortures here are similar to the Tapana Naraka, but the beings are pierced more bloodily with a trident. Life in this Naraka is 4.2467328 times 10 to the 17th power years long. It is also said to last for the length of half of an Antarakalpa. And just a quick note on these time scales, the basic unit of time measurement in this temporal cosmology is the Mahakalpa, or the Great Eon. The length of this time in human years is never defined exactly, but supposedly it's meant to be measured in billions of years, if not longer. And these are split up into 4 kalpas, and each of these kalpas is split into 20 antarakalpas, each of about the same length. So, in other words, a really, really long time. Then we have the Avisi hot Naraka, which is the uninterrupted Naraka. Beings are roasted in an immense blazing oven with terrible suffering. Life in this Naraka is 3.3973864 times 10 to the 18th power years long. It is also said to last for the length of an Antarakalpa. Each lifetime in these Narakas is 8 times the length of the one before it. Some sources describe 500 or even hundreds of thousands of different Narakas. Wow. The sufferings of the dwellers in Naraka often resemble those of the Pretas, and the two types of being are easily confused. The simplest distinction is that beings in Naraka are confined to their subterranean world, while the Pretas are free to move about. There are also isolated and boundary hells called the Pratyeka Nakras and Lokantarikas. Pretas are known as hungry ghosts in Sanskrit and are a type of supernatural being undergoing suffering greater than that of humans. Okay, so that was the Buddhist Narakas that referenced previously in terms of the DU, which we're talking about the Chinese underworld. So that's based on these Buddhist Narakas and other Chinese beliefs. So the DU is typically depicted as a subterranean maze with various levels and chambers to which souls are taken after death to atone for the sins they committed when they were alive. Man, all these civilizations have really similar concepts, huh? The exact number of levels in DU and their associated deities differ between Buddhist and Taoist interpretations. Some speak of 3 to 4 courts, others mention the 10 courts of hell, that's a nice round figure, each of which is ruled by a judge, collectively known as the 10 Yama Kings. Okay, once again, we have judges here. Souls to be judged. Other Chinese legends speak of the 18 levels of hell. That's slightly less round. Each court deals with a different aspect of atonement and different punishments. Most legends claim that sinners are subject to gruesome tortures until their deaths, after which they are restored to their original state for the torture to be repeated. So that's a slightly unique to the Chinese. Whereas in the other cultures and civilizations, the depictions of souls in the underworld are just eternal suffering without the rebirth and retorture. So, according to ideas from Taoism, Buddhism, and traditional Chinese folk religion, DU is a purgatory that serves to punish and renew spirits in preparation for reincarnation. Many deities whose names and purposes are the subject of conflicting accounts are associated with the DU. Some early Chinese societies speak of people going to Mount Tai, Jiwan, Jiquan, or Fengdu after death. And Mount Tai is, of course, located north of the city Tai'an in the Shandong province of China. The Jade Emperor Peak is the tallest, over 5,000 feet tall. And I'll be getting to the Jade Emperor in a moment. At present, Fangdu and the temples on Mount Tai have been rebuilt into tourist attractions, incorporating artistic depictions of hell and the afterlife. Some Chinese folk religion planchette writings, such as the Taiwanese novel Journeys to the Underworld, say that new hells with new punishments are created as the world changes, and that there is a city of innocent deaths designed to house those who died with grievances that have yet to be redressed. So that's some original concepts there for sure. Alright, so let's get into the 10 courts of hell. So the concept of the 10 courts of hell began after Chinese folk religion was influenced by Buddhism. In Chinese mythology, the Jade Emperor, so let's get into the Jade Emperor quick. So the Jade Emperor in Chinese culture and traditional religions and myths is the representation of the very first god. And he is known by many names, including the Heavenly Grandfather, the highest emperor. So, the Jade Emperor put Yama in charge of overseeing the affairs of the DU. And Yama is known as the King of Hell, King Yan or Yan Luo. He is a wrathful god said to judge the dead and preside over the Narakas, the hells or the purgatories, based on the Hindu Vedas. However, the Buddhist Yama developed into different myths and different variations. So, supposedly, there are 12,800 hells located under the earth, 8 dark hells, 8 cold hells, which I named the Narakas, and 84,000 miscellaneous hells located at the edge of the universe. All will go to DU after death, but the period of time one spends in the DU is not indefinite. It depends on the severity of the sins one committed. After receiving due punishment, one will eventually be sent for reincarnation. In the meantime, souls pass from stage to stage at Yama's discretion. Yama also reduced the number of hells to 10. He divided Dayu into 10 courts, each overseen by a Yama king, while he remained as the sovereign ruler of Dayu. Okay. Among the various other geographical features believed of DU, the capital city has been thought to be named Yodu, surrounded with and pervaded with darkness. Another interesting note on the Narakas, usually hell is hot, but they have the cold Narakas, so there's also the opposite. We don't normally see that. Usually it's just hot, molten lava, fire, all of heat relation. So Yodu, the capital of the DU, the Chinese underworld, is located under the earth in the region of darkness, also known as the Yellow Springs. The general ruler of this realm is Hotu, but many other functionaries which have been believed to inhabit the region, and with more important individuals being located in Yodu as the capital city and seat of government. So the underworld has a seat of government as well. Very interesting. Hotu literally means queen of the earth. Hotu Shen, goddess queen of the earth. Hotu Niang Niang, deep earth lady or earth queen lady, otherwise called Dimu, Mother Earth, or Dimu Niang Niang, Lady Mother Earth, is the deity of deep earth and soil in Chinese religion and mythology. Hotu is ambiguous gender. So, is this all literal or is this metaphysical? We don't know. But continuing, the description of Yodu is present in various texts and art. Being located in darkness underground is the most common feature. Generally, lighting is provided by torches and candles. Yodu may be the best lit area of the Dayu. Yodu is the home of various deities and also the location of their official offices or palaces. The souls of the dead are their fellow inhabitants and subjects. There are also many subordinate demons, which serve to carry out the commands of the judges. Many of these are concerned with punishing or processing the souls of the dead for reincarnation. The sovereign deity is generally considered to be King Yama. Beneath him in rank are the other 10 kings as judges of the souls of the dead. Various creatures also inhabit Yodu, including a creature that can determine truth from falsehood. So we have monsters roaming the underworld in the DU as well as all of these other underworlds. So the Yaodu is similar to a Chinese capital city. So it has a city wall, palaces, a hall of justice, various residences for the ghosts of the dead. Especially important is the housing for official records, which allow the various judges to determine proper punishments or occasionally to allow someone who dies before their officially allotted time has expired to be returned to life. That's a unique concept as well. Especially important in this regard are the place of King Yama and the 10 courts of justice. Okay, so that is the capital city of the Dayu. Okay, so I mentioned before that in some versions there's 18 levels of hell, and this started with the Tang Dynasty. The Tang Dynasty was between 618 and 907 AD. And these 18 levels of hell are the Mountain of Knives, where sinners are thrown off cliffs and land on mountainous terrains with sharp blades sticking out. Some depictions show offenders climbing trees with knives or sharp thorns sticking out of trunks and branches. Interesting here. Cauldron torture. Sinners are fried in cauldrons of oil. Dismemberment. Sinners are dismembered by various means, including sawing, slicing into half, mashing, pounding into pulp, being crushed by rocks, boulders, being run over by vehicles. Interesting. I guess carriages. Grinding torture. Sinners are put into a grinding machine and ground into a bloody pulp. Burning. Sinners are set aflame or cast into infernos. Palau torture. Sinners are stripped naked and tied to a large hollow metal cylinder with fire lit at its base. Boiling liquid torture. Boiling liquids are forced down sinners' throats or poured on parts of their bodies. Torture involving the removal of body parts or organs. Tongue ripping, eye gouging, teeth extraction, heart digging, disembowelment, skinning, etc. Ice world. Sinners are frozen in ice. Some depictions show unclothed sinners suffering frostbite in an icy world. Their bodies eventually fall apart or break into pieces. Quick here, though, just if this is a physical place beneath the world or not beneath the world, above the world, they could be talking about the Arctic, the Antarctic. If these ancient civilizations did have worldwide travel abilities or greater technologies, that opens the door to these actually being physical places. Just a thought. Scales and hooks torture. Sinners are pierced with hooks and hung upside down. Some depictions show sinners having nails hammered into their bodies. Pool of blood. Sinners are cast into a pool of filthy blood where they drown. Blood spills from all bodily orifices. Torture involving animals. Sinners are trampled by cattle, gored by animals with horns or tusks, mauled or eaten by predators, stung or bitten by poisonous species, etc. And the Avitsi, the period of suffering in this chamber is the longest. It is reserved for sinners who have committed heinous crimes, including the 5 grave offenses. And the 5 grave offenses are intentionally murdering one's father, intentionally murdering one's mother, killing an arhat, a fully enlightened being, shedding the blood of a Buddha, or creating a schism within the Sangha, the community of Buddhist monks, nuns, and parasa who tried to attain enlightenment. And these are these 5 crimes. So, some literature refers to 18 types of hell for each type of punishment. And some books say that wrongdoers who were not punished when they were alive are punished in the hells of death. And then, of course, the concept of the 18 hells started in the Tang Dynasty. As said, the Buddhist text Wen Diyu Jing mentioned 134 worlds of hell, but this was simplified to the 18 levels of hell for convenience. But they cannot die from torture because when the ordeal is over, they are restored to their original states for the torture to be repeated. All right. So once again, we have the recurring themes of tormenting sinners' souls, judgment, and these are just concepts that are constantly repeated in all of these different civilizations all over the world. Where did they come from? It's very, very interesting. In Chinese Buddhist mythology, there was a hero named Radish, a disciple of Buddha. Before leaving on a journey, Radish gave his mother, Lady Leek Stem, money for begging monks. The mother failed to give the money to the monks, but she lied to her son and said that she had done so. When Lady Leekstem died, she went to hell. Radish became so holy that he was made a saint named Mulyan. With Mulyan's enlightenment came the knowledge of his mother's torment. He went to hell to save her, although Yama, the king of hell, warned him that no one had the power to change a sinner's punishment. On his way, Mulyan had to travel past 50 demons, each with the head of an animal and swords for teeth. By waving a wand that Buddha had given him, he was able to make them disappear. Finally, Mulyan found his mother, nailed to a bed, but he could not release her. Only Buddha could change a sinner's fate. Mulyan asked Buddha for mercy for his mother, and after the proper prayers, Buddha released Lady Leekstem from hell. The Japanese underworld is the Yomi, the land of night or gloom. It was empty until the creator goddess Izanami died after giving birth to the god of fire. The maggots that appeared in her dead body grew into a host of demons who populated Yomi and tormented the souls of the wicked. Although Yomi was said to be a dark region of barren plains and lonely tunnels, artists often portrayed it as an underground palace crowded with the dead and demons. Also there was Emma-O, the Japanese version of Yama, the Buddhist god of death, who judged the souls as they arrived in Yomi. Once again, we have the concepts of judging souls and demons and soul torment, just like the Egyptians, just like the Greeks, just like all of these other civilizations. Pretty interesting how all of these cultures had similar ideas. Where did they get these ideas? But I'm going to get into Mesoamerica now. So we're looking at the Aztecs, the Maya, Olmecs, Toltecs. Let's go over the Maya underworld. It was known as Shambhala. Okay, once again, kind of close to Shambhala. Shibalba, Shambhala, Shangri-La, Shibalba, Zibalba or Shibalba. And this is the name the Maya gave the underworld. The Yucatec Maya, it was the Met now. Shibalba translates to place of fright. Again, similar themes. Why is it so scary? And apparently it's like the underworld of other cultures. It is not a place that can be easily escaped. So karma also has a place if you lead a good life and do not commit too many sins, you will avoid eternal damnation and torment. Just stick to the Maya belief system and you will be alright. However, to completely avoid Shibalba, you would have to have died a violent death. So I guess they do promote war, similar to the Norse. With Valhalla in Asgard, which is the Hall of the Slain. And this is, Valhalla is of course a majestic, enormous hall, ruled over by Odin. Half of those who die in combat travel to Valhalla when they die. The other half go to the goddess Freya's field of Folkvanger. I'll be getting into the Norse later in another episode to expand, only touching upon it in this episode because there is so much to the Norse. And also the Celtic mythology, which I will leave out of this episode as well, since there's just way too much to go over. So, the Shibalba. So the Shibalba of the Maya. There was a great association with water, once again, like the underworlds. And this landscape was inhabited by not only gods, but also various monsters. Many heroes actually ventured into the Maya underworld, and there are many such myths detailing their adventures. So Xibalba in Maya mythology was located in the far west, and this is evidenced by burials in the islands of Campeche, and this is off the west coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. This is the most west of the Maya territories. Xibalba was entered through a cave in Tlalpactac. This was the surface of the earth and the first of 9 underworld levels. Okay, so once again, we have 9 worlds just like the Norse mythology. I mean, there almost needs to be some work dedicated specifically linking the Norse and the Maya, because these cosmologies have quite a few things in common. So the other interesting thing about the Maya is the Milky Way galaxy itself was also considered an entrance to Xibalba, and along which the souls of the dead walked to meet their fate. So this 9 underworld level idea is represented also in the tombs. The gigantic stone pyramids they built have 9 levels, the tombs for their kings. So these include the Temple of Inscriptions at Palenque, Temple 1 at Tikal, or the Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza. So of course we have great torments described here, similarly like the Chinese Daiyu, where emphasis is made on pain and suffering. Flesh is torn from the body, eyes hang from sockets, and there is bleeding from all orifices. Very terrible fate. So, in the translations, various translations, a group of 9 to 14 gods, the lords of the underworld, rule this realm. So the translations are pretty interesting. We have Death 1, Death 7, which are the 2 most important. We have Pus Master, wow, Bone Scepter, Skull Scepter, Jaundice Master, Blood Gatherer, and Bloody Claws. Interesting. So there's another unique, interesting idea in the Maya Shambhala, and that is these lords of death, when they felt like it, just wandered right on up to the world of the living, where they would cause death, destruction, disease, and torment of all kinds. So that's pretty interesting. Another interesting thing is every astronomical god had its own manifestation in the underworld. So it's almost like a mirror from the world above to the world below, a reflection of the same god in the underworld. So once again, so we have the sun descriptions, just like in Egyptian mythology. Actually, I'll get to that in the underworld, the movement of the sun, where it moves around the underworld before it goes back up to the above world. Now, what that has to do with the actual physical representation of their cosmological belief system remains to be thoroughly explored, but it seems like they actually are describing what they believe to be their version of physics. So facts and science, this is their science. So the sun god, Kinich Aja, traveled through the underworld at night, and that is when he became the jaguar god of the underworld. The Popol Vuh, which is the definitive book of religion of the Maya, describes the Xibalba. It is extremely large, with a varied landscape, similar to the world above. There are 2 large rivers, and to get to the 9th level, you have to go through trials and tribulations, as the souls through other underworld mythology also have to pass through. Again, all of these recurring themes, very interesting. So you have to go across dangerous waters, high mountains, rivers of blood, knives, arrows, and even to sacrifice your own heart. Now, this podcast isn't dedicated on the symbology of the heart, but we have that in many cultures, which is another extremely interesting facet of all of this mythology. So, similar to the Egyptians, the Maya, in order to aid with their journey through the underworld, the dead were buried with objects to assist them, weapons, tools, and also jade or other precious metals, and also even food, as well as dogs, so to help them with their journey. Sometimes they were real dogs, other times they were pottery depictions of dogs. So the Shambhala in the Popol Vuh is described as this terrible, daunting place for souls to cross. And there was emphasis placed on outwitting the demons instead of simply just fighting them head on, which is also interesting. So the maze god, Hunahpu, and his brother have an interesting story. So they were playing a game with a ball, and they were very noisy. And this disturbed the gods of the underworld, and they demanded they descend down into Shambhala, where they suffered greatly. When they played another game of ball, they were sacrificed and buried under the court. The maze god's Hunapu's head was placed in a cacao tree. One of the daughters of the gods of the underworld, known as Blood Maiden, saw the head and talked to the head, which spit in her hand. And this is when she became pregnant with twins. The siblings were Hunapu and Yax Balam, the famous hero twins of Maya mythology. And they were known as great hunters, jokesters, and excellent ball players. Once again, like their father and uncle, they were summoned into Shambhala and tortured in the chambers with death bats, jaguars, cold and fire. Once again, the Maya also added the cold, so it wasn't just the brimstone and fire. And again, they had to play a game of ball. Unlike their father and uncle, they won the game instead of losing, but they were to be killed anyway. The gods of the underworld tried to kill them, but the twins jumped into a large fire, committing suicide. The gods wanted to kill them themselves, so they brought them back to life. And however, they were brought back as dancers, and so destroyed Shambhala, killed all of the gods of the underworld, and even resurrected their father, the maze god. And the interesting legend goes, so along with many naked maidens and many treasures, used a canoe to escape from Shambhala and return to the living realm. So this is the myth, which supposedly is just a metaphor for planting maize seeds and the growth back to the surface. That is what modern scholars attribute this to. However, I believe, like many others believe, that it could have possibly been their depiction of a real story. However, if it took place thousands of years before, like a lot of this mythology, there would be a whole lot lost in this broken telephone game, and possibly even mistranslation if this was a tale from an older civilization. But think about it this way. If, let's say, thousands of years from now, someone finds, let's say, the Declaration of Independence. So if you live in the U.S., you know what that is, and if you live in first world countries, or any countries that you can study history, and you will see the Declaration of the Independence, or any government document of the like in other countries, if you're not in the U.S. Thousands of years from now, that could be regarded as a myth. Like, what's a colonist if the word was mistranslated, or leader or explorer turned into a god, and then you had like George Washington all of a sudden being the god of the United States or whatever, and you have broken telephone. Let's say there was 3 or 4 different languages that evolved from this. So one day, thousands of years from now, that could all be mythology. All our history books could be mythology with exaggerations and all these things that don't make sense. But enough of that, back to Shambhala. The Maya art is obviously very extensive, and The gods of the underworld are depicted in reliefs, in pottery, in paintings, and the depictions are pretty terrible. The souls of the underworld are tortured. Similar like the Dayu in the Chinese, there's emphasis on a lot of torture and suffering. Circa 683, King of Palenque, Pakal the Great, on his sarcophagus there are inscriptions, and he is depicted as falling backwards into the large centipede jaws of the underworld. The Maya also represented the underworld in their architecture. Pyramids, supposedly intended as tombs, I mean there's much debate and speculation, just like with Egypt, had 9 platforms to represent the 9 levels of the underworld. Again, if you are looking at it as the underworld is our world now, does the regular world, is this the 9 levels? There's just, it's impossible to say any of this for absolute certainty. The ball court at Utatlan is also thought to represent Shambhala, and the south building of the complex at Uxmal has a level with 9 doorways, another supposed representation of Shambhala. Next, let's get into Quetzalcoatl and the Hollow Earth. So, Teotihuacan, the ancient city in Mexico, home to the Aztec pyramids. Teotihuacan is actually the Aztec name for the city, meaning place of the gods. But the original name has yet to be deciphered from the surviving glyphs at the site. So, they still do not know the original name, because the Aztecs and other civilizations came to live at Teotihuacan, but they did not build it. So, this ancient city is located 30 miles northeast of Mexico City, and the greatest flourishing period is said to be between 100 BC and 750 AD. And so this is one of the largest and most important sacred sites of ancient Mesoamerica. Supposedly, there were over 200,000 people who once populated the city. And giant monuments are found in this city, including the temple of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, and the pyramids of the sun and the moon. However, much about Teotihuacan remains unknown, including the origin of the original people who lived there, as they did not leave any written records. So, very interesting. Long-rumored tunnels beneath the cities have been discovered in 2003, and new discoveries as recent as 2017 have also been made. So, they found many tunnel systems. So the entrance to a 1800-year-old tunnel beneath the temple of the feathered serpent, the third largest pyramid at Teotihuacan, was first discovered in 2003. And an extensive project involving both human researchers and remote-controlled robots has been ongoing ever since. Only recently have Mexican archaeologists announced the result of a years-long exploration of the underground tunnel, including the discovery of 3 chambers and thousands of artifacts, including jade statues, jade jaguar remains, and a box filled with carved shells and rubber balls. Rubber balls. Now, researchers have also announced the presence of a large quantity of liquid mercury. Mexican researcher Sergio Gomez, who has been working on the excavations of the underground tunnel, told Reuters that the liquid mercury may have been placed there to symbolize an underworld river or lake, and could be a sign that the team is drawing closer to unearthing the first royal tomb ever found in Teotihuacan, and unraveling centuries of mystery regarding the leadership of the once powerful city. The tunnel is the metaphorical representation of the conception of the underworld, said Gomez. A large offering found near the entrance to the 3 chambers suggests they could be the tombs of the city's elite. Due to the magnitude of the offering that was found, royal tombs can't be in any other place, added Gomez. So, back to Quetzalcoatl. So this is opening up a huge can of worms, but let's do it anyway. Let's shock the mind. This is, after all, Mindshock. Let's get the official description out of the way. Quetzalcoatl, part of Mesoamerican literature, is a deity whose name comes from the Nahuatl language and means feathered serpent, or Quetzal feathered serpent. The worship of a feathered serpent is first documented in Teotihuacan in the 1st century BC or 1st century AD. That period lies within the late pre-classic to early classic period. 400 BC to 600 AD of Mesoamerican chronology, and veneration of the figure appears to have spread throughout Mesoamerica by the late Classic period, 600 to 900 AD. But in the occult, it's not so simple. They've actually found people worshipping this feathered serpent all over the world. All over the world. Statues, reliefs. I mean, it's pretty crazy. Some theories have Quetzalcoatl being Jesus himself, but this isn't the podcast for that. Other theories have Quetzalcoatl being the great serpent of the Bible, that some say this means he was Satan or Lucifer. But once again, this isn't the podcast for that. But in general, this Aztec deity, whose name means feathered serpent, god of the air or a sun god and a benefactor of the human race, instructed them in the use of agriculture, metals, and the like. According to one account, Quetzalcoatl was driven from the country by a superior god, and on reaching the shores of the Mexican Gulf promised his followers that he would return. He then embarked on his magic skiff for the land of Tlapalan. Tlapalan, a place of the black and red color, is a legendary place or region on the Gulf Coast of Mexico where King Quetzalcoatl went on his flight from Tolan in order to burn himself and change into the morning star. The tale can be found in an important 16th century manuscript, the Codex Chimalpopoca, containing the annals of Cuetitlan. Much is written about Quetzalcoatl, many of it contradictory, but one legend relates this Mesoamerican god of the Maya and the Aztec. A legend has it he flew off in a UFO for 8 days, where he visited the inner worlds beneath the sea, returning to create man, leaving messages in the geometry of his design to be found at the end of time. I guess this is referencing sacred geometry. This speaks of ancient alien theory and reality as a consciousness hologram. Water, sea, collective unconsciousness, and grades. So very, very curious, this entity of Quetzalcoatl. Very, very interesting. Let's move on to Norse mythology. The 9 worlds of Norse mythology. Asgard is above. Helheim is below. Helheim is, of course, hell, 1 L, which translates to hidden in Old Norse. Hidden. Very, very interesting. The ancient Norse pagans spoke of Udris well, a portal through which one must pass in order to get to Helheim, the realm of the dead. Yggdrasil is an immense mythical tree that connects the 9 worlds in Norse cosmology. What's really interesting is that hell with 2 L's is indeed derived in language from hell with 1 L. And the Christian version is not similar to the Norse other than a location after life. Once again, we have similarities to the Greek and the Egyptian and some of these other mythologies. Once again, I don't even know if I want to use the word mythology. I mean, they wrote it down as their history, as their facts. So, I mean, if someone thousands of years ago reads like the Declaration of Independence or something like that, and they're like, oh, look at the mythology of the United States. It's not our mythology, it's our real history. So if another civilization looks back on it and finds it so incredibly strange because their civilization is so different or their understanding of science is so different that they decide to call it mythology, that doesn't really mean it's mythology per se. It could just be historical fact or historical record, we don't know. So, apart from the fact that hell and hell are both realms of the dead located beneath the ground, the two concepts have nothing in common. While the Old Norse sources are far from clear on exactly how one ended up in one of the Norse afterlife realms, rather than another, there were several, what is clear is that where one goes after death isn't any kind of reward for moral behavior or pious belief, or punishment for immoral behavior or impious belief. Furthermore, while the underworld isn't described often in the sources, when it is, it's generally cast in neutral or even positive terms, as a place where the dead live on in some capacity. It's sometimes portrayed as a land of startling, abundant life on the other side of death. The dead in hell, with 1 L, spend their time doing the same kinds of things that Viking-age men and women did: eating, drinking, fighting, sleeping, and so forth. It wasn't a place of eternal bliss or torment, as much as it was simply a continuation of life somewhere else. Very, very interesting. A journey by the hero Hadding from the Gesta Danorum, the history of the Danes, by the medieval Danish historian Saxo Grammaticus is typical. Gesta Danorum describes Danish history and to some degree Scandinavian history in general, from prehistory to the late 12th century. Here is Old Norse scholar E.O.G. Turvo Petra's apt summary. While he was living with Ragnhild, Hadding had another mysterious experience. A woman appeared bearing some herbs. Wishing to know where such herbs grew in winter, Hadding went with this woman under the earth. They passed through mists and then through sunny, fertile regions where the herbs had grown. Then they came to a raging torrent flowing with weapons. Crossing by a bridge, they came upon armies of fallen warriors locked in eternal battle. As they pressed forward, a wall stood in their way. They could go no further. These are common stories with common themes in mythology the world over. So, not a whole lot of references to in Norse mythology, but they are there. And then, of course, the 9 worlds, many different worlds. Is this literal? Are these stacked levels? Are these planetary, metaphysical? I mean, we really don't know. There's so many different possibilities. Now, another thing that's not talked about too much is African mythology, which is pretty strange because Africa is a gigantic continent. Supposedly the cradle of all mankind, depending on what dating system you subscribe to, what you believe. I mean, there's quite a few different belief systems. Even if you believe the ancient alien theory, some people believe the Garden of Eden is actually in Africa itself, and that is where the first man emerged from. I mean, South Africa has some interesting ruins dated by some to hundreds of thousands of years, and even cities in the shape of human cells. That's not what this podcast is about, however. We are only going to talk about the Hollow Earth and the mythology of the Underworld and how it relates to Hollow Earth. So, in African mythology and African origin oral traditions, relate of the creation of the earth. I'll be going into how they relate to the creation of the earth and what has been passed down in these oral traditions, and some recorded many, many years later. But many African peoples regard the earth as a female deity, a mother goddess who rules all people and is the mother of all creatures. Parallels to Gaia, of course. The earth lives and gives birth to ever new generations of beings. She will make the grass grow when heaven gives her rain, and if there is no rain, she withdraws into her own depths, waiting for better times to come. Many regions of Africa have to endure a dry season when nothing grows and death reigns. As soon as the new rains, life begins miraculously. Grass sprouts, flowers open, and frogs croak, creeping out of the earth who hid them. Thus the earth conceals life, protects it against desiccation, and revives it as soon as better times arrive. Without the gifts of the earth, no one lives. Many African peoples believe that the ancestors live in the earth, in houses very similar to the ones they have had here on the surface of the earth. They also own cattle and goats there. There is a Zulu myth in which people go in search of the milk lake under the earth, from where the milk is absorbed by the grass roots so that the cows and goats have milk from the earth. Where else could the milk come from? Our own flesh is earth. Even the name Adam means earth. All creatures are earth. Fire, too, lives in the earth, which sometimes spits it out when in anger. Fire comes out of wood, so it too must come from the earth. Wind, too, is believed comes out of the caves inside the earth. Thus, all 4 elements come out of the earth. Yet the earth is seldom worshipped. The libations which are poured down during numerous ceremonies are more addressed to the ancestors than to the earth as a whole. Nevertheless, the earth has a very powerful spirit which rules over our life and death. Sometimes, when she is perturbed, she moves forests and mountains and all. Unlike man, the animals understand their mother and obey her, although sometimes she will have to punish a disobedient creature. So, very interesting views on the earth in African mythology. And once again, we have strange coincidences, like Adam translating to earth. And of course, even atom sounds like atom, A-T-O-M, the building block of life. Or the building block of matter, rather. So there's quite a few coincidences in all of this, depending on whether you believe in them or not, or how many you are willing to accept before thinking that maybe, just maybe, there is a link that links absolutely everything, and all of these ancient mythologies are representing something, some kind of a root truth, somewhere. In Akan mythology, Adu Ogiene is the name of the first man. The Akan are a group of people who occupy portions of Ghana and Ivory Coast. It is believed that they descended from a group of people who entered the area 2000 BC as farmers. Stone-using villages have been discovered in this region, which suggests that they kept livestock and cultivated crops. In the area of Brong, Adansi, and Asin, a matrilineal Akan group emerged and spread to inhabit most of the land between the Volta and Kamo rivers. They found Guan people, the accepted early owners of the land, already in some of those places. Nevertheless, around 500 BC, the Akan had begun to establish their social and political institutions. So, according to Akan mythology, all humans lived deep within the earth. One day, 7 men, 5 women, a leopard, and a dog crawled out of a hole made by a massive worm. Looking around them, the astonished people became terrified, but Adu Ogienai, the first man on the surface, seemed to understand the world and its wonders. He calmed them and gave them strength by laying his hands on them. Adu Ogienai also took charge and grouped the people into work teams. He coordinated the building of the first shelters until a tree he was chopping down fell on it and killed him. A very interesting tale of Adu Ogienai. Adu, Adam. Again, we have similar sounding names here. How could this all be a coincidence? The African underworld is known as the Kalunga, and this is also personified as a singular god as well. And so the Kalunga directly signifies the great bringer of order, and this referred to the cosmological order that God created. At the center of their understanding of the universe was the Kalunga, as the threshold between the lands of the living and the lands of the dead. Good ancestors were believed to live below the Kalunga in an inverted world that could be accessed via bodies of water or sacred caves. Again, we have this water and cave element to all of these underworld mythologies all over the world. Very interesting. If you accessed these portals through bodies of water or sacred caves, the passage through the Kalunga was a transformation linked with the color white. Oh man, now we're going into seeing the light, seeing the white light upon death. Or the color of the sea bottom, or the dust rubbed onto a soul as it squeezed through the small portal in sacred caves. One then emerged into a world of spiritual power where the ancestors walked inverted with their feet up and hands down. Its people slept during the day and were active during the night. In the Congo tradition, they say the world of the living is a mountain and the underworld of the dead is another mountain pointing downward. So, also very interesting, we have inversion in their version of this Kalunga. Let's go into the Bantu cultures of Africa. So they locate the world of the dead underground, just like pretty much all these other cultures. And there are myths and legends that living people can enter the world of the dead, another theme running through all of this. Kuzumi in Swahili is the world of the dead. This may happen by chance to someone who is trying to hunt a porcupine or other animal inside its burrow. Some legends are about heroes who willingly enter the underworld in some kind of a quest. This is Mpobe in Baganda mythology, and Ukama in Zulu mythology. While Bantu cultures also believe in other spirits than those of the dead, for example, spirits of nature such as Mwenemembago, the Lord of the Forest, in Zarumo mythology, these play a much lesser role. In many cases, they were originally spirits of dead people. One finds here and there traces of belief in a race of heaven dwellers distinct from ordinary mortals. Sometimes they have tails. In Angolan folklore, death is explained as this. Heartbroken after the death of his favorite wife Muhungo, Chief Kitambe ordered his people not to speak or eat until she could be brought back to life. The headman of the tribe asked a medicine man to fetch the queen from Kalunga, the world of the dead. The medicine man ordered all the people of the village to wash themselves with infused herbs and shortly afterwards descended into the land of the dead with his son. Following a road, the man soon encountered the queen. She showed him Kalunga Nagambe, the lord of the underworld, and explained that he devours everyone in the end. She also pointed to a shadowy figure in chains, the spirit of Chief Kitamba, who was destined to die soon. Giving him a funerary bracelet as proof of his encounter, the queen sent the medicine man back, telling him that no one who entered Kalunga could ever leave, and that he shouldn't eat any of the food or speak of Kitamba's impending death. Otherwise, he and his son would both be forced to stay in the underworld. When he returned, he presented the chief with the bracelet, and the chief confirmed that it was indeed that of Muhungu. The Ashanti people of Africa have a myth about Kwasi Benefo, who made a journey to the underworld. Kwasi Benefo married 4 women in turn, and each one died. Miserable and alone, he decided to go to Asamando, the land of the dead, to seek his lost loves. He went to the place of burial and then beyond it, passing through a dark, silent, trackless forest. He came to a river. On the far side sat Amokye, the old woman who greets dead women's souls. So do we have here a version of the boatman, Karan, except for the woman, and she is a female. Very interesting. Again, on the river. She felt sorry for Kwasi Benefo and allowed him to cross the river, though normally the living are forbidden to enter Asamando. Soon Kwasi Benefo found the invisible spirits of his wives. They told him to marry again, promising that his 5th wife would live and that they would be waiting for him in the underworld when his time came to die. Kwasi Benefo fell asleep and awoke in the forest. He brought from the underworld the precious gift of peace of mind, which allowed him to marry and live a normal life for the rest of his days. Very, very interesting tale of this Kwasi Benefo. Again, reiterating certain concepts of souls living in the underworld, waiting for the living when their time comes. Very, very interesting. And the boatman of souls is a woman who greets the dead souls of women. Very interesting. Very, very interesting stuff here. And African mythology, for some reason, is not as widely talked about as these other mythologies, but they still have much to offer, especially in these viewpoints, some of which are very, very similar to these other mythologies. So, the story of Mepobe in Baganda mythology is as follows. There was once a hunter named Mepobe who was an expert in hunting the edible rat, the musu. One day, as he was sitting in his house, he saw a friend, a muzizi, come running towards him, who said, "Come and let us hunt the rat." Mpobe agreed to go and took his hunting net and his dogs, and they went off together to the place where the game was known to be abound. Omazizi told Mpobe to stop at a certain place while he went to fix the net to catch the animals. When he had fixed it, he called to Mpobe to let the dogs loose. The latter then fastened the bells to one dog and turned them loose. The dog soon started a fine rat and went after it, but it turned and ran to one side where there was no one standing and no net to stop it. Mepobe said, "Never mind, the dogs will catch it," and he followed them, leaving his companions by the net. Omazizi waited until sunset for Mepobe and then took the net and went home. The rat ran on and the dogs after it, and Mepobe after the dogs, until it entered a large hole, and the dogs dashed in after it. When Mepobe reached the hole, he could hear the bells, and followed the sound of them. They went on until the rat came to a number of people. It rushed past them with the dogs close after it. When Mepobe came up, he was surprised to see the people, a large garden and many houses. He asked the people if they had seen his dogs. They replied that they had, and pointed out the way they had gone. So he followed, though he was afraid, and at length he came upon his dogs with the rat standing near an important-looking person. Mepobe fell down before him and greeted him, and Death, for it was he, asked him where he came from. Mepobe answered that he came from above, where he had been hunting, and told him how he had followed his dogs into the hole, and until he reached that spot. Death then asked him what he had seen since he entered his country. Mepobe said he had not had time to look about him because he was so busy following the dogs. Death then told him to return to his home and warned him not to tell anyone where he had been, nor to mention what he had seen. And he said, "You must not tell your father, mother, wife, nor any of your brothers." Mepobe promised to obey and said he would not speak about the place. Death threatened him that if he ever did, he would kill him. Mepobe then returned home with his rat. His wife congratulated him upon his return and went to cook his food. After the meal, she asked her husband, "Have you been in the field all the time since you went away?" He replied, "Yes, I went to hunt the rat and stayed all night hunting it." His father came later on and asked him where he had been hunting all the time. Mepobe replied, "I was in the field hunting all the time." After some days, Mepobe's mother came to see him and found him all alone and asked, "Were you really in the field all these days? And what did you eat and drink?" Her son replied, "As I have said, I was there. I am not going to tell you anything further. You can go and ask others and listen to what they say." She answered, "Mepobe, tell me just a little. Please do." Mepobe answered, "I will tell you just a little, but do not tell anyone else." His mother promised she would not. So Mepobe told her how he followed his dogs, how he entered into the hole, and came to the land of the dead, where he saw numbers of people. He told her how fearful he was, how he asked the people to tell him the way the dogs had gone, how he had come upon death and found his dogs and the rat, how he had been sent back with the rat, and how he had thanked Death. He further told how Death had asked him his name, and warned him not to tell anyone his experiences on pain of death. His mother left him after hearing the story and returned home. In the evening, when it was dark, Mepobe heard someone calling him, "Mepobe, Mepobe," and he replied, "I am here, what do you want?" Death said, "What did I tell you?" Mepobe said, "You told me not to tell what I had seen at your place. And sir, I have only told my mother a little." Death said, "I will leave you time to settle up your affairs. You must die when you expended your property." Mepobe was silent. He had nothing to answer. Death therefore repeated his words, so Mepobe answered, "Let me sell all I have and live upon the proceeds before I die." He sold his first child and bought a cow with the money and killed it and ate it, very slowly. A year passed, and indeed many years, before he had come to an end of all his property. Death called to him and asked if he had not consumed everything. Mepobe said he had not. He tried to hide away in the forest where Death would not find him. But Death said, "Mepobe, why are you hiding in the forest? Do not think I cannot see you." He tried all kinds of different places wherein to hide, but Death always discovered him. At last he returned to his house and said, "Let me remain here and let Death come to me, because it is useless to try to hide from him." Death came and asked, "Mepobe, have you finished your wealth?" He replied, "I have finished it all." So Death took him. Hence comes the saying, "To be worried into telling a secret killed Mepobe." If he had not told his mother, Death would not have killed him. So, pretty interesting story. Once again, we have a hole in the ground entering the underworld through said hole in the ground, and then some added information, the personification of Death as a human-type being, an important-looking man, and not being able to hide from Death. And also, the punishment of death to those who divulge the secrets of the underworld. That's an interesting theme as well. Okay, so now we have the story of Unkama of Zulu mythology, a mythic hero who made an accidental journey to the underworld. Unkama had planted a millet garden, but when the millet ripened, a porcupine came each night and ate it. One morning, when there was dew on the ground, Unkama was able to follow the porcupine's trail. The trail led to a hole in the ground, into which Unkama descended. Unkama went on and on. He was no longer hunting the porcupine, but seeking to reach the end of the hole. After a time he came to a village. He heard dogs barking and children crying, saw smoke rising from the cooking fires and people walking around. Unaware, Unkama had crossed over into the land of the dead. He became frightened and returned along the path he had taken, walking backward. When Unkama returned to his village, he discovered that he had been gone so long that his family had believed he was dead. They had already burned his clothes and other belongings. Unkama then told his amazed family about his strange journey. So another similar story to Mpobe's. So we do have a lot of similarities, but the last group of Indians that I'm going to go over is perhaps the most fascinating, the Makushi Indians of the Amazon. So, they apparently have one of the most interesting Hollow Earth mythologies, although once again, they relate it as truth. The Makushi Indians have always known that the earth is hollow. Not only their legends assert, but the grandparents of the current Makushi knew of the entrance. Until the 1900s, the young warriors descended to the bottom of the earth to visit the tall men. I'm assuming they're talking about giants here. For them, obviously, there is a whole world inside our planet, right under our feet. The Makushi tribe lives in Amazonia, their peaceful life of hunter-gatherers. They are nomadic and move between Brazil, Guyana, and Venezuela. Their distant ancestors, the children of the sun, have taught them and shown the access to the inner earth. These are singing caverns that lead to underground rooms of enormous proportions, where the stalagmites form real labyrinths. For those who can find the stairs, there's a way down into the bowels of the planet, and after 2 weeks of perilous descent, to gain the inner paradise of the shining giants. That's really far down if it takes 2 weeks, wow. If only the intruder knows the way, which is impossible, the secret is lost, and no one no longer ventures into the deep caverns. At least that is what the Makushi claim. Their honesty is still to be demonstrated. They alone have the sacred charge of monitoring the entrance and preventing access to the hollow earth to foreigners. Imagine their sacred mission is still continuing. How can they admit they still go down there? Or if this account is true, why are they talking at all? Strange, strange. The account of the journey to the center of the earth is still very much alive in the Makushi culture. The first 3 days, the warriors must descend a steep staircase with giant-sized steps. Okay, so I guess they're insinuating here that the giants built these passageways. The descent is very painful, and many braves renounce continuing the adventure. After the 3rd day, they leave their torches behind and continue their inner journey illuminated by artificial lights. These are giant lanterns, the size of a watermelon, very bright. On the 5th day, they reach huge caves whose vaults are lost in the mists. In one of them, 4 spheres shine like a sun, and no one can face them. Each passing day, they walk faster. They have more strength, as gravity seems to decrease. Later, they cross the lava zone, skirting the abyss where the incandescent magma is bubbling. This is a very dangerous passage. The apprentice must be accompanied by an experienced guide because many brave men lost their lives in these chasms. Around the middle of the trip, a curious phenomenon occurs. Warriors seem to lose their weight. They are now moving by flying above the ground. It looks like gravitation force has disappeared. It seems like the climax of the Earth's gravity is not the Earth core, as was believed until now. It would be the middle of the crust in the middle of the lava zone, some 250 kilometers deep. After this point begins anti-gravity. Unfortunately, another obstacle is hindering their advance. The strong windstorm can blow and force them to hold on with all their strength to metal railings that are here for. After traveling 13 to 15 days, the most valiant warriors lead inside, and there, on the other side of the world, in the inner earth, live the tall men, about 3 to 4 meters tall. So that's almost 10 to 13 feet. They are lovely as long as they are obeyed in all respects. They feed on giant fruit, huge wheat grain reminiscent of Osiris's. Once again, we see common themes here. Fields, yards, unknown crops ripen under indoor sun, which could be the crystal center that Mobius liked so much. It is like a red star whose light is pure vril and has the power to rejuvenate the beings it illuminates. The air is sweet, fragrant, far from the surface pollution. In the worlds of the Makushi ancestors, the earth core is full of riches and incredible wonders. The legend also says that Western explorers, by trickery or force, have previously obtained the plan of the caves. There were 5 Europeans, 2 Spanish and 3 Englishmen, thirsty for gold and diamonds found in large quantities there. Needless to say, they were never seen again. So is this underworld realm where the Mayans, Aztec, Incas, they got all their crazy treasures, their valuable metals and treasures of all kinds. Very interesting. Following this unacceptable intrusion, the giants would have come out to punish Makushi of betraying the secret. They destroyed the entrance, collapsing the singing caverns, mined passages, broke stairs, then no one could enter ever. Anyway, that's what Makushi say to us who are not in on the secret. I can imagine they invented the whole story of the missing explorers to prevent further questions about the inner world. The secret of the tall men is definitely sacred to the Makushi tribesmen. If this is true, I don't know why they talked at all, these Makushi tribesmen. And supposedly this was until 1907, so in 1907 would be when the entrance was destroyed, which is not exactly that long ago compared to all of these other ancient accounts. So, once again, we have very similar themes running through all of these ancient cultures and civilizations. I mean, fields of all kinds, and also themes of undead, dead, undead, but not necessarily a hell for punishment. Not necessarily a hell for punishment. So, that's the basic ancient account of Hollow Earth, but of course there are some extravagant conspiracy theories that center around alien bases, UFO bases, joint U.S. government alien bases, entire cities of various lost civilizations existing under the surface of the Earth. Some theories even speculate there is another sun, moon, and star system inside the Hollow Earth. An even more bizarre theory is the concave Earth theory, that everything is inverted and we're actually in the center of Hollow Earth right now. That's a bizarre one. We're not going to be going into that one too much. Other theories believe that points along ley lines serve as access points to this underworld realm. Majestic sites such as Mount Shasta, the Giza Plateau, sacred sites in Tibet and all over the world. Other proponents of this theory maintain that the North and South Pole are the only access point. Further theories, such as Atlantis, are intertwined with Hollow Earth, as well as the interior lands being the home of aliens, giants, and even Bigfoot and other creatures who sometimes wander out. Hollow Earth really does touch everything. And of course, the subterranean kingdom of Agartha, its capital city Shambhala, and how some of these ascended masters continue to communicate with humans through channeling and other psychic mediums. And then, of course, we also have Thule, the associated mythical land beyond the known world, not necessarily Hollow Earth, but Thule was also known as Hyperborea. And all of these legends persist throughout history in various iterations. The theory really has no limits, and in typical Mindshock fashion, we will explore all of these theories and sub-theories in our usual comprehensiveness, determining how much validity there is, all while shocking your mind. Since, of course, condemnation without investigation being the height of ignorance, we shall investigate it all. On the next episode, we'll be getting into some more scientific evidence to the Hollow Earth theory, as well as the timeline of Hollow Earth in modern times. Hope you enjoyed another edition of the Mindshock podcast. You can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. And also check out our other social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, and Patreon. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. See you guys next time.